Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to do our last of the year, I think, free webinar. I thought since everyone's thinking about financial planning because it's the end of the calendar year, I thought this would be a good topic to go over because we don't talk about this kind of stuff very often in our profession. And I talk to doctors that have been in practice for 20 to 30 years. Most of them don't have a really great retirement plan in place. So it's something that you should think about. It's a little late if you're 30 years in practice to be thinking about it, but better late than never. And if you're starting off in practice, I guess under 20 years or something like that of practice, and that's a great time to be considering these things. So anyways, I want to just go through this real quick um, and maybe stimulate some thoughts and hopefully get some of you guys to consider how to calculate your financial future. So this information was brought to me originally by one of my patients, a man named Alan. And Alan used to come every Tuesday for years as a regular. He booked Tuesday, 1 p.m. He would book a year out in advance. And I don't even know why he came into my clinic, to be honest. The guy was incredibly healthy. He would just come every Tuesday, and we would end up talking for 45 minutes to an hour, for which he was paying me about financial stuff. And he was kind of like my financial coach. Um, Sort of a strange relationship, but anyways, so he coached me for years. And then there's one point in my career he must have felt sorry for me, obviously, that he actually offered to pay for in advance for like a year of his care in advance, and he offered to pay for me to go see his financial planners in Santa Barbara, and he drove me up there, and we spent a whole day working with this financial planning group, and that is the basis of the retirement plan that I still have today. So anyways, I was saved from the error of not doing any kind of planning by Alan. I just want to pass this information on. And since then, of course, I've had really great financial planners and, can just share some of the basics that we should be thinking about. So depending on what phase you're in, again, if you're in the early parts of your practice, you definitely want to put all these things in place right now. If you're transitioning over to functional medicine, you might have some, retirement plans and the work that you've already been doing. You're going to need to really rethink retirement if you're going to have a cash practice. And then if you're wanting to go, grow and you've been in practice for a long time, and you don't have any retirement because you've been, solo practitioner in a clinic on your own, then you really want to think about it even more. Okay, so some the I think the basis of all this is the understanding of what we're doing with our jobs. And just to get a little metaphysical for a minute, which is, why did we decide to do this? What drives us to do this work? And what does your future look like to you? And do you want to retire? And when do you want to retire? Well, there's certainly plenty of people in our field who are practicing into their 80s and 90s or teaching into their 80s and 90s. And that might be something that you want to entertain doing. And just so you get a sense though of what your future is going to look like and how you want your future to feel and how you want your future to be in terms of financial support as well as in terms of the actual work that we do, in terms of whether you want to be in practice or whatnot. So the basics are that these things are kind of assume that these are in place, a financial plan and a business plan, understanding your market and your products and your legal strategy. So you have basically your business, in hand, organized and functioning in a proper way. And then the last thing on the list, all capitals with a bunch of question marks, once you've got all that going, is to make sure that you have retirement and savings plans that are really going to work for you, okay? And this is really important. If you don't think about it, no one else is. So if you answer not yet to retirement planning, we want to start to think about the tools that you need to create some of the basics for thinking about retirement savings. And right off the bat, you need to get understanding around your statistics, your numbers, the profit that you're making, getting an understanding around your expenses, probably even more important in some ways, whatever debt you may have, and how your different income streams are coming in, and getting a sense of what the numbers are on a regular basis. I can recite the numbers for my clinic year on year, year after year, pretty much off the top of my head. I know what we're bringing in each month. I know where it's going. I know generally what our expenses are, and I know like at this time of the year, how much profit I'm going to have for the year, how much I've already planned out for 2018, how much I'm going to put in my retirement fund, and how much that's going to save me on taxes. And all that should be just information that you just are looking at. I don't know, I look at my stuff almost well, at least once a month, sometimes more often, to make sure that it's all working right. So it can take a long time if you're not used to doing this to consistently manage, to get a grip on your numbers and to consistently look at them. You know, the thing is that the more out of control that they are, the more you're ignoring your bookkeeping, and the more that you avoid talking to your CPA, or God forbid you don't have a CPA, you know, the more that you're in denial on all this stuff, the better you're going to feel as you start to get a grip on what's happening. And most people go through the motions on this stuff, right? And they do it for like a few weeks or a year, and then they just drop it. And you know, ever since Alan started coaching me, gosh, what I can tell you when that was before my son was born. So he's just turned 20. So let's say 22 years ago, I started all these funds, and you know, I've gotten to the point now financially where I'm really stable. And it's a nice feeling to know that you're, you know, in pretty good shape. So when you're starting to look at your numbers, you know, and getting a sense of what the structure of the business and the profitability of the business is like, you want to have a really good sense of what your hourly rate is, bringing in, right? What your supplement sales or other services are bringing in. What are all the dollars that you're actually collecting? What actually are all the, you know, expenses that are going out? And so it's really easy for people to get thrown off on that. So let's just go through this for a couple minutes so you can see the different points here and how all the different dollars are different. So all revenue isn't the same, right? So you have your hourly rate, which is a nice thing because that has no COGS, right? So COGS stands for costs of goods sold, cost of goods sold. So your hourly rate is just your time. In some way, it has the highest cost of goods sold, meaning that it's you know, it's very precious, but you don't actually have to pay anybody else for your time, right? You're just donating your time basically to the effort here. So your hourly rate has no costs associated with it, so to speak. That trips people up though, because in a way it's the most costly of all, right? But you also want to think about the uh, percent of service dollars that you keep versus the percent of total revenue. Okay, you want to think of the percent of the supplement sales dollars that you keep and how that relates to the total revenue. You want to think about the percent of lab dollars if you sell labs or if you do hyperbaric oxygen, if you do whatever that you keep versus a percent of total revenue. So for example, in my clinic, my services bring in almost exactly 50% of the total revenue. My supplement sales bring in the remaining 50%. Okay, so for every hour that I work, I bring in around the same amount of dollar amount in my service fees as I do in my supplement sales. It's almost exactly equal, and it's been like that for like 14 years, 15 years. So I charge around $500 an hour, and if I work for an hour, I sell on average around $1,000 retail worth of supplements per hour that I work. So sounds like a lot, but if you think about like today, I had 2 hours of consults with this one family from Germany. There's 3 of them, and they all bought a 6-month program. So even though I only spent 2 hours with these 3 patients, they probably spent $5,000 or $6,000 on supplements. It's a 6-month program, you know, so it's, you're not going to spend that much money every month, but still, that's basically the kind of income that I tend to generate. So again, my hourly rate is around $500 an hour. I sell around $1,000 worth of supplements retail, which means the profit there is around $500. So in my practice, that's been consistent for almost 15 years. $500 an hour, about 50% of my total revenue. The supplement sales are around $1,000 an hour, but of course the cost of goods sold there is about 50%. So half that money goes to buy the supplements. And so it's about 50% of my revenue. And that's almost exactly what my model is. And then my lab money, I break even on labs, so I don't make any profit on labs. So once you get a sense of your revenue, and again, my business model is easy, right? Because half my income comes from supplements, half my income comes from my services. It's right down the middle. Once you have that figured out, then I want you to think about this term that, again, my old financial advising company that Alan turned me on to got me thinking about, which are real dollars. So the term real dollars refers to the dollar in your hand after your taxes are paid, after all your expenses are paid, and after your operational expense, after your cost of goods sold, after everything is paid, and after taxes. So that's like a real dollar that ends up in your hand at the end of this whole process. So let's think about that for a second. So a real dollar, again, after-tax dollars that you keep in your pocket. So let's say that you sell $1,000 worth of supplements. Well, $500 of that is the cost of goods sold, right? So that means you paid $500 to get those supplements. So now you're down to $500 that you've got. Your operational expenses for selling those supplements could easily be like around 50%. So out of that $500 of profit, half of that's gone away. So now you're down to around $250 of actual income. And then you have to pay taxes on that, depending on what state you're in. That could be, 40 to 50%. So that $250 now in terms of real dollars has dropped to 125. That's a little deceptive, right? So let's do that one more time. So you start off with $1,000 worth of supplement sales. You take out $500 to pay the supplement company for the product. You take out 50% of the profit for all your operational expenses. Now you're down to 250, and then you're in a high income tax state. Half of the rest of that goes away, $125 after taxes. So you did $1,000 worth of sales, but the real dollars in your pocket for that $1,000 worth of supplements is more like $125, $200, something like that. Okay, so we want to really think in terms of real dollars because that's the money that we're able to keep. So think about the math on this. Let me just show you, because it sounds like I'm making a lot of money when and it almost sounds like I'm bragging, but I'm not. I'm just trying to tell you what the reality is. When I say, I collect around $1,000 an hour. Okay, well, that sounds really good, but really, what does that mean? Right, so let's look at the numbers around that just real quick here. Because this stuff gets a little depressing if you don't do the numbers a bit. You're going to have a little bit of shock at the end of your career when you try to retire, you don't have any money saved. So again, let's look at the model here. Let's say that you sell $1,000 an hour worth of supplements, but we just did the calculations on that, and the real dollars on that are more like $125 per hour, right? And let's say I charge $500 an hour for my services, but my overhead is 50%, so that takes that down right away to $250. So really, I'm bringing in $375 an hour. Starting out, we started off with 1,000 in supplement sales, 500 in my hourly rate, and all of a sudden the reality is I get $375 an hour, and that's before taxes on the other amount, right? So it's probably more like around 200 an hour, 200, 300 an hour. So you got to take out the cost of goods sold, you got to take out all your overhead, and then you got to take out everything that you pay in taxes to get the real dollar amounts. So if I'm bringing in, what looks like $1,500 an hour, it really ends up at the end of the day being $200-300 in my pocket. Those are the real dollars, okay? So again, thinking about different dollars that we're bringing in, they're not all the same. There's the dollars that you bill, the dollars that you collect, the dollars with supplements after the cost of the supplements. You can look at dollars after the cost of supplements and after all your operational expenses, and then look at the dollars after taxes, after cost of goods sold, after operational expenses. And then the last thing that we want to look at here, which is most important, which is the dollars that end up in pension plans and retirement plans, that are money that you can pull out before you pay tax, right? And that's the whole point of this financial freedom model, is to think through all these things and realize that it's really what you end up keeping in terms of real dollars that matters. It's the bottom line that's in your pocket, not the top line. Okay. So then, again, thinking about margins, in case you don't know this term, a margin would be, let's say that you have let's say you have a 60% margin. That means that for every $100,000 you collect, 40,000 of it goes to expenses and $60,000 you keep yourself. So that would be a 60% margin. So if your business is running on a 40% margin and you make $100,000, it means that you're keeping 40% of that, right? And so you want your margin, ideally in our industry, to be around 60%. That means 40% of the money you collect is going to expenses, 60% you get to keep before taxes are paid. If you're in the beginning part of your practice, usually the margins are lower because you have more expenses. You're starting out. So another way of saying all this is that your cost of goods sold and expenses should be around 40% of the total collection. that you make. So you can have $1 million clinic and really end up only walking away with 100 or 200 grand. So you want to be careful with that. And then when you're thinking about this, always think about like what's the actual dollar amount that we're walking away with, the real dollars that you're walking away with at the end of the day. And then the big question is, what's the major expense that all of us face throughout our entire careers? And what's the number one expense that you all, everyone, on this call experiences throughout your entire career? The number one expense you have for your whole life for sure is going to be the taxes that you have to pay on this money. So you have to start to think about the tax planning aspect of this in order to increase the amount of money that you can actually keep. And in fact, I'm going to show you some numbers about how this has worked for my clinic in a second, so you can see that a tax strategy properly put in place is, makes the world of difference. Okay. So another way to look at this, and these are just scenarios that I run on, Fridays when I'm a little bored after work, and I just want to see what's really happening with the money. It's starting to see the time, right, versus the dollars versus the total amounts. So here are the various sources, right? You have your patient hourly rate that you charge $200, $300, $400, $500 an hour, but you also have to include in your time, not only the time you spend with your patients, but your administrative time for running the clinic and your extra administrative time for dealing with patient-related stuff. So when you're looking at your hourly rate, you have to include not only the hours that you spend with a patient, but the hours you spend administering your practice, just running your practice, and the hours you spend doing extra research and investigation and emails and whatnot for your patients. Okay, so in general, in my practice, yours may be different, you should track this. If I spend about 15 hours a week doing patient care, it takes me about another 15 hours a week to run the office. I don't know about you, but I just went to the bank today and I dropped off some checks. That took some time. I don't know about you, but I did an interview with one of my new staff that we just hired. So I did another meeting where we were complaining about one of the companies that we work with, as always, on back order. We had a long conversation about AT&T and the phone systems and how screwed up our phones are right now. And so anyways, there's a lot of administrative time, right? So for every 15 hours that I spend with patients each week, there's about another 15 hours 2 or 3 hours a day, right, of running the actual clinic, all the administrative stuff. So that ends up being around 30 hours a week total, 48 weeks out of the year, about 1,400 hours. But now what you have to think about is what are the dollars involved, right? You get $400, let's say, for your patient rate, but generally most of us are not billing anything for our time spent outside the patient time, right? So there's $0 an hour there. So you have to be really careful. You have 15 billable hours in front of a patient, but there's another 15 hours of work that you do where you're not getting paid at all. So that hourly rate of $400 an hour just got cut in half right there, right? It just got cut in half. So all of a sudden, really, for the amount of hours you're putting in, you're making half of what you think you are, which is a little distressing. But this is a more accurate way to look at it. So you just want to think through all these things and start to look at how it's all going to be impacted by taxes. So I want to show you a little bit about the tax planning, and then we're going to wrap it up tonight. We're going to keep this one short, okay? So you don't get too overwhelmed. But anyways, the idea here is financial freedom, and the financial freedom is defined as the day when you don't have to work for money anymore, when you're working because that's what you want to do, and the idea is that you have enough money in your retirement plans that you no longer have to work. Doesn't matter, right? And so then you're not saying that you're not going to work anymore, but that you're just going to be able to look at doing other things and have a different quality of life. And knowing that, this is what I did with my original financial planners in Allen, was that day that we spent in Santa Barbara was determining the day when I was going to achieve financial freedom. So the retirement plans that were set up, that I set up with this group, had an end date, and it was, on my birthday on this year, I was going to achieve financial freedom because I was going to have enough money saved that I didn't have to worry about saving money anymore and didn't really have to worry about working anymore. Okay, and so it's a very detailed plan that I set out. I completely undermined that plan, by the way, by getting married for a second time and then getting divorced. That probably set me back like almost 10 years. So I'm not saying I carried out the plan perfectly, but I have got to the point now where probably in the next, 2 years at the most, I'll have that financial freedom number met where, I basically won't ever have to work again. Am I going to stop working? No, I love to work. I'm just going to not have to worry about the money part. Okay. So let's take a look at the idea about the tax and pre-tax stuff. So I don't know. I don't think I should read this. I think maybe I can just show you an example. But let me just highlight the important parts here, and then let's look at some numbers real quick. Okay. In case this is new to you, some of you may not have looked at this a lot in the past. So again, we're talking about financial freedom. This is like, how do you know, based on the number of dollars and hours you're making and the projections on your clinic, and how do you know when all this is going to come to an end? And how do you know that the dollars that you're saving are not going to be treated equally, okay? Because of the vast differences in pre-tax savings that accrue profit or income without being taxed versus post-tax savings. And so the way to reach financial freedom the most quickly is to put as much money as you can in pre-tax retirement plans that are then going to build without you paying taxes on the income. And the power of that kind of investment is awesome. If you look at these charts, the way that they grow is exponential, because you're putting money into these plans that otherwise would have gone to taxes, and you're able to generate income from that money and not pay tax on that income either, right? So there's this exponential growth to these pre-tax retirement plans, pre-tax savings. And so 401ks, right? But there's a really small limit on 401ks. So what most people do in our position, if your income's, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, is you start to think about setting up a pension plan. Okay? And you can put away quite a bit more money into pension plans depending on how they're set up. And again, the whole point of this is that once you put the money in this pre-tax plan, it would have gone to taxes anyways. Now that money is building tax-free year after year after year. And then by the time you retire, that's compounded so much that you have a massive nest egg, which is awesome. And then you can just go out and drink champagne and celebrate how happy you are. So let's just look at some rough numbers here. And I'll try to keep the math really simple. So let's say your clinic is doing $500,000 a year. $500,000 a year. And let's say that your overhead is 50%. Okay, so that means $250,000 is going away to expenses, and your $250,000 is going to be your income. And in a normal scenario, you would pay taxes on that income, and let's say you're like in a state like California, you would pay half that money in income tax. Depending on if you have an LLC, that may be a little different, but just to ballpark it, right? So, well, let's keep it. You want to keep it? No, let's just do 50%. It's just an example, depending on what state you're in and what your income bracket is, but that's going to go to taxes. And so real dollars, right, that you actually keep is going to be 125,000. So out of that original $500,000, 50% overhead. Another way of saying that is the margin is 50%. You're keeping half of it. After taxes, the real dollars in your pocket are 125 grand. Okay. Now, if you take that $250,000 of income and instead you have a retirement plan, and let's say that you put, I don't know, what's realistic? Let's say you're managed to save $75,000. How much is that? Let me get a calculator out. Let's say $75,000 divided by 12. So you're saving around $6,000 a month, let's say. $75,000 into retirement plan. Now the key is that that's going to lower your income, your taxable income now, all of a sudden is 175, right? Which means your taxes now just dropped to, let me do the math on that. 175 divided by 2, 87.5. Let's just say 87,000 now is going to taxes. Okay, now you get to keep real dollars. Well, you put $75,000 into the retirement plan, plus you've got another $87,000 in real dollars here from the income. 87 plus 75, what's that? Plus 75, that's 162. That's $162,000. So let me review how that works. In scenario A, you make your $500,000. Half of that goes to overhead. So you have 250 grand in expenses, 250 in income. On that 250 in income though, you're paying half of that in tax. So the real dollars that you walk away with are 125,000, right? And the government, God bless them, is taking 125,000. If you put 75,000 into retirement plans, your taxable income drops to 175, your taxes drop to 87. You end up then with $162,000 that you get to keep instead of 125. That's a huge increase, right? It's a $40,000 increase. It's like giving yourself a raise of 30%. Okay, and now the question then is how much is your tax bill changing, or how much money is going out? Well, remember, under scenario A, where you don't have the savings, you have to scrape together 125 for taxes. Under scenario B, where you do have the savings, you only have to scrape together 87 for taxes, right? So in a way, the government's helping to fund your retirement plan. It's basically what this is. And look how much your tax bill gets lowered. So let's say 125 is the normal tax bill, and then we just lowered it to 87. So you save almost $40,000 in taxes. So let me write that in capitals here. Save about $40,000 in taxes. And guess what? You get to keep all that money in the retirement plan, right? So if you can save some amount of money each month, set up a pension plan, you can save yourself $40,000 in taxes. All that money is going to end up going into this long-term savings plan, which is tax-free and builds tax-free. And that's how you can really create the wealth. So when we're talking about here putting away, what do we say, 75,000 into the retirement plan, 40,000 of that money was going to go to taxes anyways, right? 40,000 of that was going to go to taxes anyways. So in other words, you're like it's like the government's putting in 40 and you're putting in 40. You don't have to come up with all the money because you're saving so much on taxes. So you really don't want to, you want to maximize these retirement plans. Think of it as like a matching 401k. You're putting in 100 grand, the government's putting in 100 grand because they're saving you that much on the taxes. And it's a really beautiful thing. All right, let me grab, Karina had a question. Karina, are you there? Oh, okay, well, I'll read out the question. I unmuted you, Karina, if you want to talk, you can. Oh, there you are.
I don't think, yeah, but I don't think you can hear me.
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so, hi.
Hey.
I was wondering what kind of retirement plan you're talking about, because this sounds excellent, but I mean, I save in my 401k and maximize, but I don't know what this retirement plan is.
All right, so let's talk about it. Glad you brought that up. So this is, it's called thanks Karina for doing that. This is called a defined benefit plan. Defined benefit pension plan. So with a 401k or IRAs, they tell you you can put away this dollar amount. With a pension plan, you define the amount that you put away by looking at the benefit. So imagine this, imagine that you're running the city of Las Vegas and the police officers have a pension plan. So you would tell the young police officer, hey, you're 25 years old, you're joining the police force. When you're 45 years old, your pension plan is going to be $1,000 a month. Okay? And so defined benefit means you're defining the benefit. You're not saying we're going to save $100,000 for you when you retire, you're defining the amount as a dollar amount that you're going to get per month. So you or me, we can set up our own defined benefit pension plan, just like the Las Vegas Police Department can. You can set one up for your office. And so the amount of money that you put away into the plan is defined by the benefit that you want to get when you retire. So I'll just give you some simple math. So let's say that you want to, I don't know if these numbers are right, I'm just making this up, okay? But let's say you want to have $5,000 a month when you retire, where every month your pension plan just kicks out $5,000. So then the question is, how much do you need to save to make that happen? And there are these complicated math equations that are done by actuarial people that calculate all these things, because it's based on your age and your savings and the amount your investments are going to go up and all that kind of stuff. But just to give you like a ballpark idea, and this is realistic, you can have a pension plan that, say, let's keep the math easy, where you put away $120,000 a year, or around $10,000 a month. Okay, and then that's going to then yield you, and I don't know what the math is going to be like, let's just make it up again, let's say that the end of when you turn 65, that's going to end up being $5,000 a month of retirement. So the way that these plans are funded is by stating how much you want to get each month when you retire at age 65, and then they reverse engineer how much you need to save each year to do that. And it can be any number that you want it to be. Most of the plans that I've seen for people in art, well, you have to be able to save the money, right? So $100,000 or $200,000 a year is a lot to save, but maybe you could do $60,000 a year, or 100, or somewhere in that range. And remember that the government's going to match about half of this, because by the time you get the tax savings, it's pretty substantial. So you're not having to come up with all this money on your own. A lot of it, a significant amount of it, maybe almost half of it, is going to be from taxes that you don't have to pay. And so at the end of every year, I have a defined benefit plan that I have to fund to a certain dollar amount. Now, the negative on a defined benefit plan is that you have to fund it, right? Like the Las Vegas Police Department, they can't just say, hey, we don't feel like saving money for our pension plan this year. You have to fund it every year. It's a requirement of the plan. But you pick a number that's realistic, that you think you can afford, okay? And you just go for it. So yeah, this is not a state-by-state thing. This is all national. And there are these really complicated ERISA laws that have to do with all this, benefit stuff. And so it's a relationship between you and the ERISA attorneys and all the pension plan people and the IRS. It's not on a state-by-state basis. And you have to include all your employees in the pension plan as well. You can't just have a pension plan for yourself. Just like the Las Vegas Police Department, they can't say, oh, only the cops that are left-handed, get pensions. It's got to be everyone that's working for the organization gets the pension. But honestly, the amount of money that I put away it benefits me greatly. A certain amount of it goes to my staff as a retirement for them, which they appreciate. But it's much to your advantage to do these kinds of things. And if you can put away $5,000 a month, $2,000 a month, whatever it is that you can do for your pension plan, you can save substantial amounts of money pretty quickly that are far beyond what you could do with a 401k. But the key here is the real dollars equation that I want you guys to think about, right? Because you're going to spend this money paying taxes anyways. You might as well put substantial amounts of that into your retirement. So remember, if you have $250 in income, you're going to end up with real dollars of, what did we say, after everything's paid, of $125,000, right? Meaning that if you don't do a retirement plan, you're going to end up with like 125 in taxes and 125 in your pocket in real dollars. If you do something like a pension plan and you put away 75 grand, all of a sudden you get an extra $40,000, that real dollars, right? Because you get the savings on the taxes. Now, of course, some of that money you can't spend, it's going into retirement, but it's basically your savings. So you can boost your income from 125 up to 162 162,000 real dollars. And again, that's a 30% increase. So if you're missing out on this opportunity, I mean, you have to work like 30% more hours every year just to keep at the same pace. And it's not even that, it's worse than that, because remember, there's this exponential growth with these funds because your pension plan is put into, it's not only pre-tax dollars, but it's put into an account that builds tax-free. Okay, you only pay taxes on this money when you withdraw it after you're the age of 65 or greater, right? And so the funds not only are put away pre-tax, but they're growing every year without being taxed. And that level of compounding income is just massive. When you look at the graphs on these things, if you look at the actuarial charts on how this income builds, I'll just kind of like simulate it. But like regular income that's post-tax, that's being, you're earning income on it, but it's tax grows like this. This pre-tax money that grows tax-free is just like that. I mean, it's just dramatically different way to accumulate money. Now, of course, you can't spend it until you retire. So you have to do, this may mean you have to sacrifice not buy a boat or something, but totally worth it. And I'm pretty excited. I'm a year or two away from my own financial freedom from having done this for the last 20 odd years. And it's pretty exciting, pretty cool. So, I mean, I would recommend you talk to, a CPA or financial advisor and all this stuff. I have a group I use at Merrill Lynch. I don't know, you certainly want to ask around and find someone who's really good in terms of, someone that's trustworthy and is a large group. Okay, so let's see. Oh yeah, and your financial planner never mentioned this. I know people don't talk about pension plans. I don't know why. It's totally legal. It's a lot of paperwork, but if you can put away a couple $100,000 a year, what the heck, it's totally worth it. And it is a lot of paperwork, and it takes, some financial wizards to do the actuarial charts and stuff. And you have to have everything set up and documented properly. I pay a couple $1,000s a year to the pension plan benefit consulting group that does all this stuff, and then Merrill Lynch manages it all. Once you get it set up, it's not more than a couple hours a year of your time. Okay, it's not like this is a burdensome thing. I would probably spend an hour to 2 hours per year dealing with my pension plan. So it's not this huge big deal once it's set up. All right. So apropos, this is not really related to the mentorship class at all, other than I hope you guys all are successful in your retirement. But we are starting a class, and it's actually, I think it's starting like next week, believe it or not. It's already November 13th. So if you want to join the regular training program where we do all the lab review and clinical case study stuff, it's starting in a week. It's a really great class. This will be our last class for the year. You get $1,000 off the one-year mentorship. If you have an interest in signing up now, you can use that special code. And so in the mentorship, we primarily review cases and go over clinical application stuff, but business questions come up a lot too. And I have a firm belief that you're only going to be a successful clinician if you're financially stable and you're not worried about money all the time. So it's a big part of all this, but the bulk of the class is not talking about money. So let me just give you a 2-second tour about the class in case you haven't seen all this stuff before. So we have three aspects to the class. One is the actual curriculum, where we have a year's worth of these modules laid out, pretty practical, hands-on lab interpretation, communication, patient communication kind of stuff. And then we have our community where you can interact with other students, and we have thousands of case studies and hundreds of hours of recordings on all kinds of different subjects, from business issues to practical issues to do with patient communication, hiring and firing people, what bank you can get a loan from. We have all kinds of information in the community now. And then we have the live Q&A calls where we review labs every week. And that's, for most practitioners, that's the most exciting part of the class, I think, because it's fun to look at cases. And I'll just show you a simple example from yesterday morning. And here's what the case review the weekly calls look like. Every doctor sends in their labs with a little description of what's going on with that patient. And then we just review labs. And we kind of apply the coursework that we're learning in the modules to the actual lab. So like an adrenal lab, GI testing, and I have a big emphasis, and about half of the course is devoted to interpreting organic acids, okay? So we do a ton of organic acid stuff. It's really fun and interesting. And then the way that I think about the mentorship is that we're trying to teach a clinical model, which is also a business model. So it's directly relevant to making money, right? Because the more streamlined and effective your clinical model is, the more streamlined you are with your inventory and your supplements and the labs that you order, and the better reproducibility you get with your programs and protocols, the more efficient that the business is, the better clinical results you get, and also the more profitable you are. So we kind of link these two things together, clinical success and clinical competency with the ability to run the business well. Okay, and so it is a clinically oriented class with mostly lab interpretation stuff, but also want to make sure that everyone understands there's a simple business model behind this that you can apply as well. Okay, so anyways, class is starting in a week or so. If you're interested, get in touch with the office, and otherwise have a great rest of your year, and we'll talk again soon. Okay, bye everybody.